Welcome to another deep dive today. We're going to be tackling Bach's Brandenburg Concertos.
Oh, these are great.
Yeah, I'm excited to get into these.
Yeah.
I think everyone knows they're amazing pieces from the Baroque era.
Masterpieces.
There's so much mystery
So much.
around them.
Yeah.
And I think that's part of the fun of them.
Mm-hmm.
So before we get into all the mysteries and the actual concertos themselves,
Yeah.
let's set the scene a bit. Can you just give us a little bit of background about the Baroque period and what made Bach such a standout composer in that period?
Yeah, so the Baroque period, it's kind of a funny name, but it's this period in European history from roughly 1600 to 1750. And it's known for being very, ornate and extravagant. You think, powdered wigs and lavish palaces.
Okay, yeah.
And the music reflects that.
Okay.
So it's really dramatic. It's very ornamented. You have composers like Vivaldi, Handel, and Corelli. They were kind of like the rock stars of their day,
Okay.
pushing the boundaries with new sounds and ideas.
Oh.
And then you have Bach. He was working mostly in Germany, but he was really a master of counterpoint and these complex musical structures.
Okay. Now, counterpoint, that's a word that a lot of people listening may not know.
Sure.
Can you just describe a little bit? How would counterpoint have struck someone hearing Bach's music for the first time?
Yeah, imagine multiple musical conversations happening at the same time. So each one would have its own distinct melody, but they're all interwoven seamlessly, like a complex tapestry of sound.
Wow.
Bach was a genius at making all of these different melodic lines work together, creating music that was both intellectually stimulating and emotionally powerful.
So he's like a musical puzzle master.
Absolutely.
Wow. And how did Bach's style compare to those other composers you mentioned, the Italian and French rock stars?
Right.
Did he kind of borrow from them, or was he really doing his own thing?
Well, he definitely was aware of all the trends happening across Europe. And actually, the Brandenburg Concertos are a really fascinating example of how he blended Italian, French, and German styles into something completely unique.
Cool.
So you'll hear Italian drama, French dance rhythms, even touches of German folk tunes, all woven together with his signature complexity.
So he was like a musical fusion pioneer.
Yeah, you could say that.
Wow. Now, we can't talk about the Brandenburg Concertos without mentioning that mysterious dedication.
Oh, right.
In 1721, Bach dedicated these 6 concertos to Christian Ludwig, the Margrave of Brandenburg-Schwedt.
That's right.
So who was this guy? And why did Bach single him out? Was he like a major patron of the arts? A huge Bach fan?
Well, that's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Unfortunately, we just don't have a clear answer. But historians have come up with some pretty interesting theories. And one of the most popular ones is that these concertos were basically Bach's way of applying for a job.
A musical resume. I
Yeah,
love that.
right.
So was he unhappy in his current job?
Well, it seems that things weren't going all that great for him in Cothen. That's where he was employed by Prince Leopold. But the prince had recently gotten married. And rumor has it, the new princess wasn't that into music.
Oh.
So maybe Bach was feeling a bit undervalued or even worried about losing his position.
So maybe he sends these concertos off to the Margrave,
Mm-hmm.
hoping to impress him
Yeah.
and maybe land a better gig.
Exactly. And if you look at the dedication that Bach wrote, it is super formal and almost kind of pleading in tone.
Really?
So some scholars think this is even more evidence that he was really desperate for patronage.
Okay, so he's sending out this signal.
Yeah.
Like, hey,
Uh-huh.
I'm available. I'm really good.
Exactly.
But here's where the mystery gets even deeper.
It does.
Because there's no record of the Margrave ever responding to Bach or even acknowledging that he received these masterpieces,
Right.
let alone offering him a job.
As far as we know, these concertos were sent off and just disappeared into a void.
It's like sending a text and then seeing the read receipt and nothing after that.
Exactly. You're just left wondering, did he even listen to them? Did he appreciate them, or did they just end up gathering dust in his library?
I mean, that would be such a tragedy.
It would.
Oh. But before we dive into what happened to these lost masterpieces, let's talk about the music itself.
Okay.
What made these 6 concertos so unique and groundbreaking? What would have made them stand out, even to someone who wasn't a musical expert back in Bach's day?
Well, one of the most striking things about the Brandenburg Concertos is just the incredible variety you'll find in them. Each concerto has a completely different set of instruments.
Oh, okay.
Which showcases just how inventive Bach was. I mean, he wasn't just copying what everyone else was doing. He was constantly experimenting, pushing the boundaries of what was possible.
So he was kind of like a mad scientist of music.
Kind of, yeah. Always trying new things.
Okay. Can you give us some examples of how he used these different instruments? What were some of the combinations?
Yeah, so take Concerto No. 2. This features a high trumpet along with a recorder, oboe, and a violin. So you get this incredibly bright and virtuosic sound.
Okay.
But can you imagine how challenging that would have been for the trumpet player back then? To play in that high register, it was no easy feat.
So it would have been a real showstopper.
Absolutely.
Any other examples of instruments he used in kind of unexpected ways?
Oh, yeah. Concerto No. 5.
Okay.
This one gives a really prominent role to the harpsichord.
Oh.
It's almost like a preview of the solo keyboard concerto that became so popular later in the classical period. So to hear a harpsichord front and center like that in Bach's time, it was pretty revolutionary.
Wow. So he was pushing the boundaries.
He was.
Not just using the instruments, but how he was actually making them.
Exactly.
Sort of play and what they were capable of.
Yeah.
And you mentioned earlier that they blend all these different styles together.
Mm-hmm.
But how did he do that without making it sound like just a mishmash?
Right, so that's where his genius really shines. He could seamlessly blend elements of the Italian concerto grosso style,
Okay.
where you have this back and forth between a small group of soloists and the full orchestra. And then he would weave in the complex counterpoint of the German tradition and then some elegant dance rhythms from the French style,
Wow.
all at the same time.
But like a multi-layered cake.
Yeah, but a delicious one.
Right. Not one that makes you sick.
Yeah.
It all works together.
It does. And this actually brings us to another little mystery
Okay.
surrounding the concertos. There's some evidence to suggest that they weren't even composed specifically for the Margrave. Some scholars believe that they were actually revisions of earlier works.
Oh, so he was kind of repurposing some of his older material.
Potentially.
Thinking like, hey, I've got some great stuff here. Let me polish it up and see if it impresses this Margrave guy.
Exactly.
Smart.
The lack of documentation about their origins just makes them even more intriguing.
Yeah, that is fascinating. So we've got this musical genius who sends off these concertos, potentially reworked and refined to impress a potential patron. And then what happens next?
Well, that's where things take another unexpected turn.
Okay.
Remember how I mentioned they were practically forgotten for over a century?
Yeah.
Well, we'll dive into that story right after that. We were talking about how the Brandenburg Concertos kind of disappeared for a while.
Yeah, it's like they went into a musical black hole.
Right. It's almost like something out of a movie.
Okay, so spill the beans. What happened after Bach sent them off to the Margrave? Did they get lost forever, or was there some dramatic rediscovery?
Well, not lost forever, but they did come pretty close. After Bach sent them off, they basically vanished.
So they just sat there collecting dust.
Mm-hmm.
This potential job application that he had poured his heart into.
Yeah, as far as we know, there's no evidence that the Margrave's orchestra ever performed them, and they certainly didn't make Bach a star at court.
So what happened? Why were they ignored?
It's hard to say for sure. Maybe the music was just too difficult for the musicians at the Brandenburg court.
Yeah, maybe they were just too avant-garde for the time.
Right. Or maybe the Margrave just didn't like Bach's style. I mean, musical taste is subjective, even for royalty.
True. But thankfully they didn't disappear completely, right? How did they finally resurface?
They were eventually rediscovered in the Margrave's library after his death.
Oh, okay.
But even then, their journey wasn't over.
Really?
They ended up in the Prussian State Library in Berlin.
Okay.
And then, during World War II, they had another close call.
Oh, no. Were they almost destroyed?
Thankfully, they were moved for safekeeping just before Berlin was heavily bombed.
Wow. Talk about a close shave.
It's amazing they survived.
It is. I mean, think about it. Years of neglect and then a world war.
Mm-hmm.
So when did the Brandenburg Concertos finally get their moment in the sun? When did the world wake up and realize, wow, we have something special here?
It really all started in the mid-19th century. There was this growing interest in Bach's music, and in part, that was thanks to composers like Felix Mendelssohn.
Oh, yeah.
He really championed Bach's work.
So like a musical archaeologist.
Yeah, exactly. He was digging through all these scores and saying, hey, everyone, look what we've been missing.
It only took a couple of centuries.
Right. So as Bach's music gained more recognition, the Brandenburg Concertos started being performed more.
Okay, yeah.
At first, probably by smaller ensembles.
So a much different sound world than what we'd hear today if we went to the symphony.
Oh, for sure. But gradually, larger orchestras started to perform them, and they took on a new kind of grandeur.
Oh, I can imagine. Their complex harmonies, the intricate counterpoint. I bet it was amazing to hear these pieces in a big concert hall.
And from there, their popularity just skyrocketed. I mean, today, they're essential listening for any classical music fan.
Yeah, you hear them everywhere. Movies, TV shows, even commercials.
It's true. They've become part of our culture.
And it's interesting because even though they're so well known today, they're still performed in a lot of different ways.
Yeah.
How so?
Well, you have some ensembles that use period instruments.
Okay.
They want to create the authentic sound that Bach would have heard.
Oh, like a time machine.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But then you also have modern orchestras that play them with their own interpretations.
So you can choose your own adventure, authentic or modern.
Right. And it's not just about performances either.
Right.
Music students and scholars still study these concertos.
Why is that?
Well, they're like musical textbooks.
Well,
They're full of insights into how Bach worked.
Oh.
Music students can study their structure, how he used different instruments.
Yeah.
They're so complex and rewarding to study.
so admired by audiences, studied by scholars, and even used in pop culture.
Mm-hmm.
Pretty impressive for pieces that were almost lost forever.
It is.
But I imagine they're not the easiest pieces to play. I mean, we've talked about how innovative and complex they are.
Oh, yeah, you need a high level of skill, both technical and musical.
Yeah.
Even for seasoned musicians, the Brandenburg Concertos are considered a real challenge.
So they've gone from being practically ignored to being these celebrated masterpieces.
It's a pretty incredible story.
It is. It's a story about rediscovery and about the power of music.
Mm-hmm.
But even with all the recognition they get today, the Brandenburg Concertos still have a certain air of mystery about them.
Yeah, I think that's part of their appeal.
What do you mean?
Well, we'll probably never know exactly why Bach composed them or why they were neglected for so long.
Maybe that's part of the magic?
Maybe. It's like they have this secret history, this hidden meaning that's waiting to be unlocked.
And it makes you want to keep listening,
Yeah.
keep exploring, hoping to find those clues.
Exactly. And I think that's what makes them so special.
We've really gone deep, haven't we? Exploring these concertos.
We have. It's been quite the journey.
It has. And you know what? It really highlights how much context matters when we try to understand music, especially music from such a different time.
It's like we're detectives trying to piece together all the clues.
Right. Trying to understand not just the notes themselves, but the whole world that created them.
And I think one of the biggest takeaways from all this is that we need to step outside our own time and really try to imagine the world that Bach lived in to really appreciate these pieces.
It's like what we were saying earlier. Music isn't just these sounds floating around. It's connected to everything.
Exactly, but here's what gets me. Even though these concertos are so rooted in the Baroque period, they still speak to us today in this really powerful way.
It's like he was able to express something that goes beyond time or place, something that everyone can connect to.
Exactly. It's the joy, the excitement, the beauty of it all. It just resonates no matter who you are or where you come from.
It makes you wonder what the world would be like if we hadn't rediscovered these pieces, if they'd been lost for good.
Oh, that's a tough one to think about. It makes you realize how important it is to preserve these treasures, to make sure that they can be shared with future generations.
Absolutely. It makes you really grateful that we still have them. So any final thoughts for our listeners as we wrap up?
I'd just say don't stop here. Keep exploring Bach's music. There's so much more to discover, and you might just find your own personal connection to his genius.
Yeah, the Brandenburg Concertos are an amazing starting point, but they're really just the beginning. And if you're already a Bach fan, I'd say listen to these concertos again. Pay attention to all the details we talked about today and see what new things you notice.
You don't need to be an expert to appreciate them. Just listen with an open mind and let the music take you where it wants to go.
I love that. So thanks to everyone for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you enjoyed exploring Bach's Brandenburg Concertos with us.
It's been a pleasure.
And we'll see you next time for another musical adventure. Keep listening.